Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. In today's episode, we have a lively conversation about many of the criticisms of Aikido and the excuses that are often used to justify them. Joining me in this conversation today is Brandon Needham and Dan Holloway. Before we start, please consider supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Spirit Aikido online program, which currently has more than 160 videos. Another option is to contribute any amount you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. Well, welcome again to Martial Wisdom, and I've got with me Brandon Needham and Dan Holloway. So we're going to talk today about a lot of the criticisms that come to Aikido from not only outside, but inside Aikido, mostly outside, and that kind of damage the reputation of the art. And then we're also going to talk about the excuses that are often put up to justify why we don't need to change anything or why we don't need to address these criticisms. So before we get started, I'd like to have Brandon and Dan both give the little brief introduction, and then we'll kind of just get right into it. Brandon, how about you start?
Sure. Thank you for having me on, and it's good to see you. I've done Aikido since 1996 and am currently Godan. I was teaching for a number of years. In 2019, that halted though, and then with the pandemic, that kind of further took challenges for
hitching the giddy up, so to speak,
for restarting and redoing some things. But also, I have done a number of arts. A number of years I've done judo, and past few years I've really taken up Brazilian jiu-jitsu and engulfed in myself in that. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Great. Excellent. Dan?
Yes, so I did Aikido for around 17 years-ish. I achieved the rank of Sandan in Yoshinkan Aikido. Trained with some great instructors like Robert Mustard Shihan and Joe Tambu Shihan, who I went and spent a month in Australia training with. Since then, I kind of diversified slightly and did some MMA, did some striking arts, did some combatives as well as some more self-defense based things. And then now run kind of a mixed martial arts syllabus, but not MMA syllabus, like a mixture of martial arts syllabus at my academy, Empower Martial Arts, based in Lincoln in the UK.
Excellent. Well, great. And I want to say, I'll put out to our listeners and the readers on, I originally posted this question on the Aikibudo Alliance Facebook group. And even among, I think we're at about 600, 700 people now, even though we just started the group earlier this week, we got some fantastic responses. I put out the question, what are some standard criticisms that you've heard or that have been put to you about Aikido? And what are the excuses that are often the responses that are used as excuses of why they don't need to be dealt with? And Dan actually came out of the gate right away with like 6 or 7 of them that were just fantastic. And I'm sure all of these are stuff that we've all heard before. And a lot of us have used some of these excuses before. And I will unashamedly say that, yes, I've heard these from my own instructors before, from other instructors. I've used them basically because I didn't even think them through necessarily about whether they were good answers. They were just the stock answers that we are kind of expected to foster on. But when I put my mind to them, almost all of them fell down immediately as being nonsense. And a good reason why a normal, sensible person, even without martial art experience, can go, what are you talking about? Like, what that excuse does not make any sense, much less somebody with exposure to real violence or a practical martial art or practical fighting background. So let's kind of get right into these, and I'm going to start right with one of Dan's, and this is, I think, his first one that he came out with, which was the criticism is that Aikido is not pressure tested and is therefore not effective. And the excuse tends to be, and there are many of them, but this is one of the top ones, is that Aikido is about the uke-nage relationship and working together. Basically, that it is cooperative training only, and it's not about competing. Maybe we'll have Brandon start with this one. How would you tear this one down?
Well, first, I'd probably agree with that. As far
Did you
as
agree with the criticism or the excuse?
Both.
Okay.
I agree with I agree that people use that excuse
Sure.
to justify, the beauty of the art.
Mhm.
I don't know what else to really say. I mean, it was that's if you look outside looking in, especially from a combative art, like MMA or something, somebody looks at that and they're like, yeah, that doesn't make sense to
What in the
me.
world is this? Well,
Yeah,
since
this
Dan put
is-
up the criticism, I'll let him get the last word in on this one. But my thought is that yes, Aikido uses cooperative training. That doesn't mean that cooperative training is all that martial arts training can be. It is incomplete if all you're doing is cooperative training. Now, granted, boxing, wrestling, every other combat sport art or combat art uses cooperative training as part of the training cycle. So that is the valid aspect of the excuse. However, when you never take your training beyond that, you will hit a very low ceiling and you will not be able to perform when your attacker or your opponent is actively trying to overcome you. And so the excuse, I think, is partially true. There's some valid aspects to it, but it cannot be used as the excuse why Aikido should never be pressure tested. There should be no active training or live training or anything that will help develop the skills to prepare somebody for a live attacking opponent. So that's how I would kind of tear that one down. So Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a big one. It's probably one of the highest criticisms that I've seen
Mhm.
in terms of, and I think it doesn't just or like apply to Aikido, it applies to traditional martial arts in general.
It
And I
does.
think now, since probably maybe the late 80s, early 90s, with the emergence of UFC and things like that, the pressure testing aspect is so important now.
Mhm.
And people more and more are getting, they're wising up to the fact that a lot of traditional martial arts, you stand there, you do your kata, you do your kihon, things like that. But it's always on the basis that you're working with your partner. And if you're looking for efficacy and if you're looking for something that's dynamic and it's going to work, you need to pressure test. And that percentage, I think, is the percentage of pressure testings where it kind of falls down. As you said, every single martial art has got or combat sport has got an element of compliance to it. And, working with your partner, if you're doing pad drills or something on the boxing, but it's the percentage that does that. That's a small percentage of boxing. The majority of percentage is sparring, because that's where you kind of hone your craft and that's where you get your experiences. As we said before, you don't learn too much from just winning all the time. You learn by your losses. And if you get punched in the face, that's quite a good indicator that you need to do something else. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of that in Aikido. It's the emphasis is kind of like at least 80%, I'd say, kind of that relationship between Shite-inuki or Tori-inuki, however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't nearly enough emphasis on kind of going, all right, well, I'm going to actually put some resistance in now, but real resistance, not kind of compliant resistant, if you know what I mean. Like you can resist, but only in a certain way. It's like, well, I'm going to resist the way that I want to resist. And this has been shown time and time again through just one look at YouTube: Aikido versus wrestling, Aikido versus Taekwondo, Aikido versus karate, blah, blah, blah. 9 times out of 10, the Aikido guy's getting taken down and mounted and armbarred and just, destroyed. And it's not even, a struggle for anyone who's got a background in most things.
I think the takeaway here is that compliant only training essentially is lazy training. And I think that's what we need to own. And the idea that we can't allow our training to be lazy or to just be satisfied with that low ceiling of working with the compliant partner, and much less expecting them to be. So I think this was a good one. I know we've got quite a few, so I don't want to dwell more than 5 minutes or so on each one of these. And we're going to try to get to all of them without this being a ridiculously long show. So let's get right on to the next one. And this one was also a great one too. The criticism, also, this one's also from Dan. The criticism is that Aikido is too traditional in its attacks. For example, from sword cuts. And we all know Shomanuchi, Yokomanuchi are at the top of the food chain, as it were, for the attacks that Aikido practices from. And the excuse for this is that attacks can be tweaked to match real world attacks, such as a Yokoman strike representing a hook. And of course, the big one we've always heard is that Shomanuchi could be a beer bottle that somebody's being swung at somebody's head. I'm going to tackle this one first, and then we'll have Brandon. We'll put Dan on last because he came up with all these, so these are great. All right, the beer bottle one. And recently there was a video that came out of person getting attacked with a knife, and the attacker actually came with an overhand, like a psycho type of a stab attack to the chest, and it was successful. So you can't say that that attack does not exist in real fighting. My observation is that it is not a very common attack, as opposed to a haymaker. And I'll get to that one here in just a second. But what I found in terms of practice is that shomanuchi is a highly telegraphed strike that is very easy to train against. And for the most part, it's easy to train brand new people with it because it's probably the least scary, the least frightening one. And it's easy to build the choreography aspect to it with the telegraphing. But as soon as you tell uke, all right, surprise me now, things change entirely. And I also want to address the haymaker one, which, and I was always told the yokomen is a circular strike, and it can represent a hook punch or a haymaker or an overhand right or any of these common strikes. And I found that one falls down as well, in that those are different types of strikes. Those angles are different and they look different. And with the competition I used to do, it was one of the things you try to do was fool your opponent by showing them subtle differences from an attack that you want them to think you're throwing than what you're actually throwing. And sometimes those differences can be quite minute. And the differences between a yokomen strike and a solid hook punch, those are quite different. Even though, the direction of the hand might be the same or pretty close to the same, the body mechanics are different and the tells that happen are different. And my other frustration with the yokomen strike is this same thing with the yokomenuchi, this huge telegraph. I'm putting my hand out here to show you what's coming, to give you time to prepare. Like in an actual attack, that might happen because somebody's basically fighting out of anger, they're being stupid, but they might not either. They might trick you or they might not telegraph. And that's kind of what we're working for. So Brandon, I'll give this one to you.
I got to be honest, I don't buy that excuse because, like you said, excuse me, a punch can be used in different ways. And if you're going to train to defend or use something, you train like you want to fight. Mm-hmm. And I know from experience that I've seen people who have done Aikido, and instead of hitting somebody the way they should have hit them, they've used an open palm shomanuchi and got obliterated by it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a fan of using those. I want real strikes. That's why I think when we pressure test, find somebody that's a boxer or somebody that can strike and work against them and see what you can do and what you can't do. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I think things are really going to start changing, is if you start using those types of strikes. And we've talked about, changing, are we going to change Aikido? Well, I mean, part of the change is you have to pressure test. And I know that there's people that do that, but if you're going to say I can defend against a yokomen and it can be used as a haymaker, I mean, as well as I do, there's variations of every strike.
Absolutely. And significant ones.
Will use them. Yes. And they will use them. And mm-hmm. if you're only training against 3 different types of angles of attack, you're not going to be successful, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You might be, but chances are you're not going to be, especially against a good striker. So I agree with you 100% that, that mentality needs to change as far as, using these strikes. It's good for tradition. It really is. And I'm not saying we should fully remove it if that's the route people are going to go. But, if you train like you fight, then your brain reacts when in a confrontation, how you're going to remember your training. And if you start striking people with sword strikes, you're going to get hurt in a real fight. And I think that's a false sense of reality for a lot of people that they have in their head, that they're really learning something, when I don't think that they really are.
Agreed. Dan.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the yokomenuchi kind of thing being turned into a haymaker, I think you've got to distinguish between people who can throw a punch and people who can't throw a punch. Like, arguably, if it's a big wide haymaker of someone who has no idea and has never really thrown a punch, they're just throwing it out of alcohol-induced anger or something like that. Arguably, you could say it's more like the yokomenuchi strike. But if you get anyone that's done a little bit of boxing or Thai or striking or kickboxing or anything like that, the hook's going to be nice and tight, the shoulder's going to be protecting the chin, etc. It's going to be a technical hook. So at that point, the range is gone anyway because the arm's not extended. You need to get way closer in, as opposed to kind of leaving that arm out and things like that. So it's a different range, I think, from people who can throw a punch to not throw a punch.
Well,
so
and even from somebody with perhaps just a little bit of skill with throwing a punch, the idea of having your elbow canted in versus out is a significant difference of what is being delivered to you.
Yeah, for sure.
Just that alone, and that's a big one. There's other ones that are smaller too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, excellent. Let's get on to the next one. Let's go with also from Dan. Aikido is not evolved with the times as other martial arts have, such as through competition like judo or jiu-jitsu. And the excuse being that Aikido is a traditional martial art focusing on the spiritual side of the arts and promoting general health and well-being. Brandon, you're shaking your head. Run with it, brother.
The whole spiritual thing, man, that blows me away. People, the no touch, spiritual, fluffy, big circles, it really kills me. And I ran into that when I started Aikido. I went to a school that was not like what I saw Steven Seagal doing in the movies. I saw this school doing these flowery, routine
motions,
falling, their hand would go up and people would fall down. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what the hell that is. That's not what I want to do. And so I left, it just kind of charred me. The spiritual thing, my understanding is when O-sensei said and did things, he said and did things in different periods of his life. And depending on what period of time you studied or were with him, you might take something away differently than what might be the truth. I still believe firmly that even though he was in his 60s, 70s, and however old he was before he died, that he was still a warrior. Mm-hmm. And I think some of his words were misinterpreted or misunderstood, perhaps. And when people, or if he did say something, they ran with that and said, well, now we're going to be spiritual. We're going to study ki and whatever, inner power that we can muster from ourselves to make the universe better. That's one of the criticisms I think that people do have is the love, peace, harmony, type of mentality that a lot of Aikido practitioners do have. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing per se, but that's kind of what they base the art on. And Aikido to me is a martial art, not a martial thought.
Sure.
And
I think some of this comes from the fact that O-sensei was a devoutly religious man,
right.
and spoke from that side of himself, as well as, in fact, probably even in place of actual physical instruction from the people
right.
that learned from him. They would often comment that whatever he said was incomprehensible. Like they didn't even know what he was talking about, because he would speak in parables and he would just his language, and you can't even say it was the language barrier because these were all native Japanese speakers. So you can't say that this was an American misrepresentation or misunderstanding, or some other foreign language. And I think crossing the lines of religion and spirituality into the martial arts to the degree that it was done was probably has sown more confusion than it has clarity. Not to say that philosophy of when you have the power to harm somebody that you need to be a philosopher, that's a valid concept. The fact that you need to have a level of morality, a level of sensibility and logic and reason and ration. You could argue whether or not religion brings those things, but for many, many centuries, those two were viewed as being intertwined. So I certainly don't condemn anybody for being religious, but trying to put a religious overtone to martial art training is inherently problematic. Yes. And I think you're right. And within this, I guess, explanation, the word that triggers me is the traditional. What tradition? How far back do you go to pin down put the push pin in the map that says this is the tradition part? Most modern people consider traditional to be kind of the choreographed, swoopy, ritualized training that has come to represent a lot of modern Aikido. Well, if you go back to just anybody who trained in O-sensei's dojo in the 50s, and when it was called Hell Dojo, would
Hell
certainly
Dojo,
say
yeah.
there is nothing to do.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do. That tradition has nothing to do with what we call traditional today. And I would think it would go even, back into the 40s and such, where martial art training, if anybody of that era saw what Aikido training by and large was today, they would probably laugh themselves into a hernia. They say, I don't know what you people are doing. But so where does the tradition go back? And I don't think you need to go back to the 1800s or the 1600s or whatever to say that these are samurai who are fighting for their lives on a battlefield in order to convey that true Budo aspect of physical training. And so that's where I would tear down not only the traditional, but also the spiritual or quasi-religious tone of the Aikido reputation. And so it's a valid criticism, and I think it's one that has to be sorted out. All right, Dan, you're it.
Tag, you're it. I agree with all the points. I think you've got to look at the era that you're looking at. Obviously, pre-war and post-war, I think it was a slightly different Aikido. The issue of Aikido is seen as this peaceful martial art, which I think is a good thing. But you also need to have the mindset of the peaceful warrior. So you need to be able to turn it on when you need to turn it on. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's maybe lost at the moment, because people focus too much on the peaceful side of it, and not enough on the hard physical.
Not enough on the warrior side.
Exactly. Yeah, it's too much skewed the other way, and this goes back to all the other points that we've just said about. The tradition is obviously important to keep, but I also think that the founder would look at Aikido now and kind of go, it's gone a little bit off the path that I originally set out for it. And where that happened, I don't know. There's obviously loads of different styles of Aikido, and each one's got its own little tweak, I suppose. Like the Yoshinkan system I trained in, that's seen as like the harder system, I suppose, and focuses more on the body mechanics and less of the esoteric concepts of religion and things like that, mm-hmm. which, I agree with, but there's still also elements in there of the compliance of all the things that we've discussed.
The ritual.
So, yeah. And again, just going back, it's not been tested, and that's the crux of the issue. Other arts develop and evolve because they stand the test of time, and they develop in terms of the society that you live in. And you can trace that all the way back to jiu-jitsu, and the way that's gone to judo, and that's gone to Brazilian jiu-jitsu now, and it's kind of evolved and been tested through competition and through like the Vale Tudo and things like that, like no hold barred, which is just a fight. And it's like, okay, well, it works, or no, it doesn't work, I need to go back to the drawing board. Mm-hmm. Aikido's never had that, but whether it had that previously, I don't know. I would imagine that testing was done previously, and it was seen as Aikido was seen as a high level martial art where other arts would go to if they already had a background in something. They'd go and train with O-sensei and go and train with him because there was obviously something there to learn. But now it's like, Aikido, nah, I'm good, I'm just gonna throw a leg kick and take you down, I'm all good. So where it's lost that, I don't know, but something needs to, I don't know, maybe something doesn't need to be done. Maybe it's just like, okay, cool. But then it goes into the health and wellness and into the yoga, Tai Chi kind of aspect rather than martial. And if that's what you're teaching, cool. But as I've always said, stay in your lane and don't give people false promises. If you're teaching something as a martial art, you need to pressure test it, and you need to kind of go in. Even if, pressure testing, as you guys know, has got different levels. You don't have to be smashing the shit out of each other every single class, but you need some level
or go picking a bar fight or something of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. Or learn from people that have done that. So, all right, well, my instructor has picked these bar fights, or he's worked on the doors, or he's done this, or he's done that, and he's got a real knowledge of real world violence. So at that point, maybe you don't have to. It's still good to, I think, and have that pressure and that adrenaline and things like that. But, if you've got an instructor that's done the hard work for you and knows what works and what doesn't, then cool, you can teach it as a martial art. Otherwise, if your instructor's only experience of physical conflict has been in a dojo with your friend that you then go for a beer with after training, it's like, can you teach it as martial art, or can you teach it as a health thing? Stay in your lane.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, let's get to the next one. Also from Dan. He was on a roll this day. I would tell you, this is great.
Emerging here.
That's right. The sensei senpai kohai approach to Aikido negates real questions being asked as to the applicability with full resisting opponent. Uke is told to resist, but to resist in the correct way. And I think it's probably a subset of the previous discussion. The excuse of this is that the relationship is traditional and Uke must resist correctly in order for the Shite to feel and learn. I hope I pronounce that right, because we always use the term Nage. That's kind of how I was brought up. But in order for Nage to feel and learn the technique correctly, I think this is a byproduct of that, the nuance of cooperative training, where the resistance that offered is in a very narrow band that allows just a little bit of creativity, but really nothing significant. It to me is one of those things. You can certainly have beginners start this way. In fact, it's better for them to start with limited variables. They only have to worry about learning a few things, but the goal is to grow them out of that, kind of like teaching somebody the language by starting with the alphabet, and then they learn their ABCs, and then they go on to forming words, and then they learn grammar, and then they learn on and on and on. But you can't stay learning the ABCs for 10 years. Like, if you're doing that, you're a bad teacher and you're doing your students a disservice. Brandon, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you. You want to start people off easy, especially beginners. You don't want to just power something on them. And
you'd be a bad teacher not to throw too much at them.
Absolutely. But I think once you start attaining a certain level of proficiency in a technique, you really need to start resisting, and you need to start alternating the way in which you do it. Because if you just do prearranged attack or grabs continually, when you really get attacked or grabbed, again, it comes back to what we said earlier, you're not going to know how to react, and you're going to fall back to what you know, and what you know is not going to serve you well.
Mm-hmm.
So resistive training is a good thing, and grabbing someone and really grabbing someone. If I grab someone, as well as I do, I'm not going to hold somebody's arm or hand. I'm going to punch them. That's what the grab's for. I'm going to come up and punch them.
You drag them off their feet and have your way with
something like that. So so much to say. There's false sense, people think they're going to come up and just get grabbed, and then you stand there and you do the technique, and it's choppy motioned drilling. It's not good flowing drilling. And I think that there needs to be a certain, Nage, Uke, teacher, student type of role. But at the end of the day, there needs to be resistive and what I would consider applicable or practical attacks and technique. And you will have to work your technique in different ways. It's not going to look pretty if you're really doing it. It's beautiful in the dojo, and it's great to throw people and have that kind of fun. But at the end of the day, it doesn't look good in real life, and it shouldn't look good in real life. So you have to expect that, I didn't throw them and they didn't go the right way, or they didn't fall the right way, or whatever the case is. I think we have to do more as instructors and people that can spread Aikido to a different generation, that we need to prove that there's applicability, and we need to really start stressing the pressure testing, if that's what you want to call it, or however you want to call it, pressure testing, realistic training, realistic. I think that's the way it needs to be. And the excuse, we need to do away with a lot of these excuses. And Dan brings up a lot of good points when he was saying that on the Facebook group.
Mm-hmm.
For all 250 questions and answers he gave for us. I appreciate it. He came up with a lot of good stuff, and I have to say, that's just my opinion on the whole. We do or don't resist. We don't resist. People don't resist, and it's pathetic in a lot of ways. And Aikido just looks bad. A lot of it is because of that, in my opinion, because that's what I hear the majority of people say when they look at Aikido, not just the dancing and the skirts that we wear, but you guys are just, you aren't resisting. It's just somebody comes up and does a grab, and then you do a technique.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem.
Definitely. All right, Dan, your turn.
Yeah. Again, I agree with all the points. I think it's the issue of active resistance, where it's like, okay, you can grab, and then if you're resisting, grab harder. It's like, okay, well, that's it. But there's nothing else to it. You're not pushing, you're not pulling or you're pushing and pulling, but in a certain way. you're pushing to help the turn or the draw in, etc. But that doesn't happen. When you grab and you get pushed, you're off your feet and you're getting pushed back, and usually followed with something else. You don't just stand there and grab and then grip harder. It's a grab and a push, or a pull in, or a headbutt, or something like that. It's a follow-on process. That grab, and I've said this before, but I think the grabbing part of Aikido is good. So I think in terms of people having grip strength and things, I think that's a good part of Aikido, because from day one we're taught how to grab, whether it's lapel or wrist or etc., which is great, but we don't do anything with it. Or you guys, Aikido don't do anything with it. They grab, and then they grab harder for resistance. But there's no active, like, I'm going to pull you in now and punch you, or I'm going to pull you in and headbutt you, or I'm going to push you off your feet and drive you forward, which happens. In fights, you get driven into the wall, get driven into the bar, get tripped, get pushed over. And that's the issue that isn't dealt with. And I think that's the problem with the majority of training for people, that there just isn't. It's resisting, but it's passive resistance. It's not active resistance. And that's what I mean when I'm saying you're resisting, but in a certain way, as opposed to just kind of going, right, let's go.
I want to jump in with one last one here that I've noticed, and that is in the attempt to, I guess, fight for relevancy, what I've seen happen quite a bit is, okay, we're going to make the choreographed Aikido go really fast. We're going to have the uke rush up like in its dramatic run and do this grab, and then have this huge dramatic throw. It's really just doing the choreography faster and with a harder, more dramatic throw on the end. But there isn't that uke activity other than him trying to make the camera or make the viewer drawn in by having this excessive motion. Yeah. And it was me taking a very close look at Steven Seagal's demonstrations and how that translated into his movies. His movie choreography that I did a breakdown of, until when this came so clear into my mind when I saw every attack that he got was two hands laying there, or uke laying both hands on either of his upper arms. Like there wasn't a punch. There was the one where it was a kick punch combination, but this is what I call demo Aikido. It's just meant to look dramatic, and it accomplishes that. I mean, it just is certainly visually appealing, especially done at high speed, because the eye finds high speed very dramatic. But it's a whole different creature when somebody rushes up to you and you have no idea what they're about to do to you. And they could, punch, tackle, you name it. You have to act differently than if you are behaving in a choreographed relationship. And the speed has nothing to do with it. And this is, I think we could go down a rabbit hole of the whole demonstration Aikido, but it's something that is an issue. Teaching the choreography both ways prepares to make you a movie star or a stuntman. It's not so much for an actual self-defense type realm. And rather than go down that rabbit hole farther, let's get on to the next one. There's so many. We could talk for a week, I'm sure, on all of this stuff. It's great. Here's the last one from Dan. The criticism is that Aikido principles are too esoteric to learn for most people who wish for functionality in a relatively short time. Train for years in Aikido, and a wrestler with 6 months of training will destroy you, usually if you only study Aikido. And the excuse is that Aikido is a complex martial art relying on exploiting the body's weak points and being aware of your own center and strong points. Brandon, do you want to go for that one?
Sure. So I agree with the main point that if you are a 6-month grappler and you've trained consistently, you will take down an experienced Aikidoka. Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah. I was awakened a little bit when that happened to me, and it was, I don't want to say life-changing, but it actually kind of was life-changing, because it made me realize the absolute limitations of what I knew versus what reality really was.
Would you say it was a crisis of faith moment?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've used Aikido in my previous job as a law enforcement officer, so I know certain things work. Mm-hmm. Also know that certain things don't work. And I found out quickly when I was taken down how much things really didn't work. And I was centered, and that didn't matter. You give a good grappler your legs, and it doesn't matter how your stance is, you're going to the ground. If you're not up against something, you're just going to the ground. And I was systematically destroyed. It was like a chess move. And so from that point on, my mind changed dramatically, because previously, I don't know about anybody else that has done Aikido, but I was always told, you just don't need to go to the ground. You just stop them from taking you to the ground. And there's these special moves that we can use to stop people from going to the ground. And it didn't work.
Mhm.
Every time it failed. So, yeah, I don't know what more to say. That is a big rabbit hole, I think, in our main art.
It is. And for me, the one that I'm going to tear down here is that, with the excuse that Aikido is a complex martial art, blah, 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 blah. This is something that, yes, I think any martial art is complex. You can't tell me that there's a simple martial art out there that does not exist. The creature is a mythical beast. But trying to say that it's so complex that nobody can understand it is basically a bad teacher.
Right.
Expecting their student to dedicate decades to something that they will say, well, you probably will never understand it. Like, if any teacher told me that, I'd say, you're a poor teacher. I'm just not even going to bother, because there's nothing that's beyond understanding or comprehension. I mean, there kind of is. We talk about things like, quantum mechanics and things like that. But in terms of the physical realm, you can get a great level of understanding. Saying that the art is complex and therefore it can't be learned, at least in a cohesive way, in my opinion, is a cop-out. It's a way for somebody who's a poor teacher, who either can't communicate well or doesn't want to, or they don't know what they're talking about and they want to sound like they do. They want to sound credible, like they're promising you this access to some kind of a power, because that's all really martial arts is access to a certain amount of capability, of a higher level of capability. You promise that, and then you don't deliver it. You say, well, it's too complicated. It takes years and years and years, and you should keep going. And that is where we start to cross into the cult-like behavior, where you have these people who are seeking knowledge and skill and understanding, and it's always kept from them. It's always kept just beyond their reach to kind of bait them into getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and accepting the membership into the cult. All the while they're contributing to it, usually money, but also time and effort.
Cool.
All right, sorry about that. We had a little bit of a glitch. What we're talking about was the kind of the cult-like behavior of making the skills and what Aikido promises to train people elusive, and the idea that this art is so complex that it really can't be learned or understood, in my opinion, is a problem. It's a problem for practitioners. It's also a problem for prospective new students who would want to commit a huge amount of time to something that you're outright told you're never, or you're never going to get tangible benefit out of, or it's going to take decades in order to do that. And for Aikido people that are scratching their heads wondering why are new people not signing up and not coming in, to me, this is a very tangible issue that needs to be dealt with. And so it disappoints me when it's so complex you can't understand it, or it takes a long time. I've spent some time asking many people that have been doing Aikido for 10 plus years, how long did it take you in studying this martial art for you to feel at least somewhat confident that if somebody got up in your face and attacked you, that you would be able to competently deal with that attack? And the low end was 8 to 10 years in terms of the answers that I got. Some of them said 15 or 20, and others said, I've been doing Aikido for over 15 or 20 years, and I still don't feel confident to handle such an attack. And I was appalled. Like, if this is a martial art, these are completely unacceptable answers.
Why are they still training then?
You got to wonder. And I mean, I give it to you that the camaraderie is great. The physical training is great. Or at least it can be. They could just do it out of habit. They could do it that they love dressing up in the hakama, or, doing their little cosplay LARPing thing. I mean, I don't know. It could be the politics in the dojo that they like to indulge in. Could be any number of things. But at the end of the day, that answer was haunting to me. And this wasn't like 5 or 10 people that I talked to. Anybody I knew that was above about Shodan, because I figured, maybe there's some Shodans out there that feel, yeah, I studied for about 2-3 years, and then I started feeling like, I could deal with it. I got none of that. And so that kind of speaks to this whole, how complex is the art? If you make something so complex that you admit you can't understand it, your brain will not be able to understand it.
Well, let me pose you this counter to that. If take the complexity issue out of it, if we started actively resisting and actually going full on with attacks in a safe manner, of course, but if we started doing that, do you think that might improve people's chances of effectively using it? For instance, and I'm going to use judo and jiu-jitsu as an example, because I would consider them complex arts as well, but they actively resist each other, and you can use them. And I feel that learning through the active resisting, the grappling and fighting, or whatever you want to call it, actually helps people learn the techniques better. So maybe that is a huge downfall of Aikido. And I mean, it's another point that we made, but I'm wondering if that could maybe elevate people's techniques as far as being able to use Aikido.
For sure.
I wouldn't even say that it might. It does. And this is something that I tried. I started doing with my brand new students about 5 or 6 years ago. Is basically, I wanted to say, why is it that we take years, Aikido, take years to build that competence, when other arts are doing it in 6 to 12 months? And I'm not talking about creating a combat monster here. I'm talking about somebody that's fairly confident in stuff and takes a swing at them, like simple, basic stuff, shoves them, grabs them, that sort of thing. And so my goal was to shorten that curve. And I used exactly the formula that you're talking about. Yes, you start out brand new people, where they need to start. Some people they have no physical background whatsoever, and you need to start them at, square one with the ABCs. But the goal is, within about 6 months, you can get people to understand what it's like to have somebody take a wild swing at you and know how to respond correctly, and do so in a physical manner. And I wanted to take this and sort of use my students as guinea pigs. Like, could this be done? And could it be done from an Aikido perspective, not turn it into a combatives class? Although there's the flavor of combatives, because that's kind of what combatives are about. And I respect them for that, where we focus on the real world attacks, the ones they are most likely to encounter. And I found those to be hard shoves, hard grabs. And I'm talking more of a hockey grab than a delicate, nice little gentle collar grab or a wrist grab that Aikido is known for, as well as things like getting into a clinch, having people trying to tackle you or take you down, real world stuff like that, in addition to some of the, your typical crosshand grab and whatnot. But I always teach them, even to brand new students, like, okay, we're going to teach the static. Now you're going to get grabbed and pulled. And this is how you blend your technique in with the direction that you're being pulled, because that might be how you would do it. So I don't even think it's a theoretical, Brandon. I think it's a hard, absolutely. And I think, any decent martial art instructor, regardless of the art, should take a hard look at having that template of learning and using it, if they're not already. And if they are, that's great. That's really cool. That, like, martial art needs more of you. If you're doing that as an instructor, that's what martial arts needs. If not, you're probably harming the martial arts pursuit more than you are helping it. Dan, was there something you wanted to throw in?
No, I think you kind of covered it, to be honest with you.
Cool.
Yeah. Just the main question of, if after 15 years and however higher a degree black belt you are, and you still don't feel confident to get some pisshead in the street that's going to throw a swing at you, and you're still going to go, I'm not sure.
And just training? To define confidence, I think it's important. It's not to say that you run into some monster like Brock Lesnar and go, yeah, I can easily take this guy. It's
average Joe.
You start to feel such fear that anyone approaches you, and you just start to shrink, like, oh my God, I'm totally in over my head.
Yeah.
And for somebody who has not gone through the curve of, eyeing somebody up and going, I'm capable enough to have a good chance in this situation, kind of points that they've had that low ceiling cooperative training. They're stuck there. So, all right, well, let's move on. And this comes from, I really hope I pronounced your name correctly, Irvind Sihota. His criticism is Aikido doesn't have enough floor-based or ground-based techniques, for example, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And the excuse is, and Brandon touched on this one earlier, this is perfect. Aikido practitioners would never let an opponent take them to the ground. If there was one that needed the BS award gold medal, this one would probably be it right here. The fact of our balance will be so perfect, our awareness will be so razor sharp, and our movement will be so well timed and perfect that no one can take us to the ground, or God forbid we start from the ground. Like, to me, is so absurd that it just I would even have trouble like putting logic to it because it's so far off the planet.
Yeah, I mean,
just stop. Let's say just stop with that.
Yeah.
Now, I guess to replace it, I would say, and this is something my instructor would always tell me. He said, you can never count on always having your balance. The real world will take you off balance sometimes. It's how quickly you get your balance and posture back. That's the important part. And I think that is solid wisdom, as opposed to trying to say, oh, we'll never be taken off our feet. Now, I will grant you that I've heard that wrestlers will often say of Aikidoka that they're hard to get off the ground, onto the ground, because they tend to move around so damn much. And you look at a good, solid wrestler, and they do exactly the same thing. They don't want to be taken down. They use good footwork. They're always shifting and moving. So Aikido has got some good stuff in there, but you can't let that cross into the arrogance realm of saying you're never going to be taken off the ground, because boy, howdy, you will be. So I think that was a great point. Do you guys have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think, again, maybe Aikido can have really good footwork and movement and things like that, but only a certain range. And then as soon as you get to a different range, which is comfortable for a wrestler, you are getting taken down. And I think that anyone that says like, okay, you're just not going to end up on the floor because my center and my power and my balance is so astronomically good, is just, again, never been put in that position where they actually have gone, oh, and then they just, again, someone with 6 months wrestling against, some of these guys that you've just mentioned in 10, 15 years training, etc., they will get taken down. And again, it just shows that ignorance and that arrogance of just kind of going, oh, well, I've never been put in that position, so therefore it won't happen. And it's like, no. Like, yeah, it's just nonsense. And it's,
a funny thing too, when I see there, and there are some instructors out there that will put up stuff for how do you defeat a leg takedown, or how do you defeat a wrestler tackle or something of that nature. And inevitably, they don't use anything like what a wrestler would use to stop another wrestler from doing that. They don't use the sprawl most often. I mean, there are people like Bruce Bookman and a handful of others that do. But by and large, they teach, well, you sit your weight down, or you sit your center down, and you keep your shoulders up, and you twist, or you turn, or you put a hand there. And like, I train with a wrestler. None of that stuff will work. You have to do what another wrestler would do to stop that from happening. And this is where I think that Aikido often strays into the snake oil salesman realm of coming up with kind of nonsense that looks feasible to convince each other that they have an answer, when in fact they don't. And that's,
they'll talk a lot, but not a lot of action, perhaps.
Right. And once you've got a well-programmed uke that won't push past the weakness and exploit it, then now you've got kind of a recipe for delusion, really.
I think, being on the ground is never a good thing. And I think most people attest to that. It's just not good. Like even BJJ guys that spend their life on the ground, it's a completely different realm to being in the street and doing that, where you've got other people and you've got, as we've discussed before, your second guy maybe that's behind you, and as you're focusing on the ground, you get a kick in the face or something like that. But learning something so simple as like a technical get up, that's kind of enough, keep someone at bay.
It's a big part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Keep on the hips, keep them at bay that way, and then just learn to get up. That could be an awesome thing that Aikido could kind of put into its syllabus or put into its training, just how to get up off the floor. Because to just go, oh, we'll never end up on the floor is, it's just ignoring.
In fact, I'd say any martial artist that can't has got a gaping hole in their abilities, in their skills, like, because that's fighting. Fighting is fighting, but being able to get up off the ground is a crucial skill. All right, let's move to the next one. Irvin had another one, which is uke leaves the arm extended after the first attack, and that doesn't happen in real life. And he says the excuse, and he said they're all bad in my opinion. If you stop the arm well enough, they won't be able to do anything after. And I'll grant you, that's an excuse I've not heard before, but certainly the criticism is valid. And I think we could elaborate that criticism to being that uke executes an attack and then stops, and then lets Nage take his turn and do whatever he wants with him. And but Dan, I'll let you go first on this one. Take the lead on it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think, yeah, the stopping and leaving the arm out thing, I don't think that's just for Aikido either. I've seen other martial arts do it.
Oh yeah.
Where people will extend a jab and then leave it, or they'll not make the distance. So they'll do a jab and a cross, but it was never actually going to touch the face. It's always like a couple of inches, and then someone does something like a weird trap or something like that. It's like, yeah, but the range is wrong. Like, the jab was never going to connect. The cross was never going to connect. So it's awesome doing all this trapping and things like that. But the distance was wrong from the very start. So that's kind of an issue that, is definitely there. And then the grabbing thing, as you said, they'll grab and then they'll stop. And that's it. There's no active resistance. There's no comeback to that. People don't just grab you and stop. They'll grab to do something else. It's a setup move. They'll grab to pull, they'll grab to push, they'll grab to drive, etc. So yeah. Yeah.
Brendan, how about you?
He covered it.
Yeah.
That's my exact thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, I guess to summarize it up, it seems like it's certainly one of those things, as you're dealing with brand new people, you need to slow things down and show them, sometimes in painful detail, which might involve uke stopping or moving really super slow so that they can pick it up. But these habits cannot last through the training cycle of a martial artist. They have to be grown out of as quickly as a teacher can guide that student out of.
Yeah, and I'm all for doing stuff slowly.
Yeah.
I think that's super important, but do it correctly as well.
Right.
This is not doing it slowly or correctly, or it's doing it slowly and incorrectly. Sorry.
Yeah.
Rule number 1: retract a jab, retract a punch, bring it back to your face. That's day 1 of kickboxing class, day 1 of boxing class. You send it out, you bring it back. That's it. You don't just go and then leave it out there for 5 minutes while we apply a wrist lock, apply a joint lock, things like that. So for sure, do it slowly. Send the jab out slowly, but then bring it back slowly as well. Don't just leave it hanging out. So it's training the correct way.
Yep. And as an instructor, this is a curve that I went through to try to solve this problem myself. And to me, the answer was, how do you explain to a student the timing? Like, what does timing mean? Because it all has to do with timing. And when a punch retracts, that's usually when you have a slight window of opportunity that's about to slam shut, because once that punch is back, it's loaded to go again. There, you just missed your window. And so there's a time when a student needs to hear that and needs to go through it and understand it. But if you skip over that because you're teaching all your ukes to leave their arms hanging out, now as a teacher, you're missing a major learning point that every martial artist needs to understand. And you can give lip service to timing, but this is exactly the time in the process where a student needs to understand that he's getting the footwork or getting the body movement, getting the placement he needs to get. That's where you move. Then you need to learn when and what you can do in that short opportunity window that you're looking for. And especially how to spot when you missed it. Like, that's when students get confused, like, what happened? Why didn't this work? And the answer is, you missed the timing. Here's what you're looking for. And all these things, I think, can be explained very cleanly by somebody that knows what they're trying to convey, and that's the important part. Brennan, anything, or Dan, somebody, anything else?
That's it. I mean,
I covered it. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll just jump to the next one. Again, Irvin Ciota, he's giving you a run for your money, Dan, and coming up with some good ones. The criticism: why don't you use punches in training? And maybe I'm not sure exactly the entire point here. Maybe he sees a lot of, and this is what I see, Shomanuchi attack being used for everything. every demonstration, or every instruction tends to start with that Shomanuchi attack, like where are the punches? And the excuse is we are developing our control, or we would have to use mouth guards and would have to use gloves if we were going to get into punching, presumably because it's so damaging or it's so dangerous to train. Yeah, if that's the excuse, and I've heard that, like, punching is too dangerous. Well, is it? I don't necessarily think so. If you can control your speed, and everybody can, you don't, even without mouth guards and having to use padded gloves, you can train without sending people to the hospital or losing teeth. So to me, that sounds like the getting into the cop-out range of, well, this is so dangerous. We have to go so light that this could kill anybody, with a motion. And I'm like, well, unless you're really a total cream puff, that's just not true. What do you guys think?
I honestly have not heard that. I've always trained with strikes.
Mm-hmm.
Done it when I started Aikido and other arts, obviously, but yeah, strikes have always been a part. Kautsky and all those variations. Even at seminars, even though punches were retracted and we obviously weren't going to hit each other, we still did it.
Sure.
So I personally have not seen or heard that.
Yeah.
I can't speak from any kind of, I think that's bullshit, but I've never seen that or heard that. So I personally can't say one way or another on that.
How about you, Dan? Any thoughts?
Yeah. It's a weird one because it goes back to what we said about the traditional chop things, but equally, what's the problem with putting a mouth guard in? What's the problem with putting some gloves on occasionally and going, okay, well, fine, why not? Just because it's traditional martial art doesn't mean that you can't go, all right, well, today we're going to look at something different. We're going to look at more of the Goshin Jitsu or some of the self-defense stuff. But some of the self-defense stuff that I've seen, the Goshin Jitsu, is still just like compliant grabbing with nothing. It's like, a bear hug. But they don't do anything from the bear hug. They just wait there and then go, drop your weight, put a Sankar Joe on or something like that. It's like, no, that's not Goshin Jitsu. That's applied Aikido, maybe a really loose, because I wouldn't even say it's applied really, but it's just deviating from the Kion. But yeah, what's the problem with just, I've always trained with punches, and even if it's from the traditional thing of going, all right, we're going to do the technique, but then even, my uki, I've been to them like, all right, we'll throw it from a punch now and see what happens. And again, Joe Tambu Sensei, he does that a lot, and he does demonstrations from kicks and punches and things like that and swings, which I like. He doesn't just do the traditional grab, the usual kind of, routine, I suppose. He looks at different things, but I think, again, he's maybe in the minority of Aikido practitioners that do that. But I think, yeah, definitely. Like, again, if you try and teach something as a martial art, you should look at what martial means. And, if you're looking for something for self-defense, train punches. That's like a no-brainer, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a no-brainer.
Yeah, well said. All right, the next one, next two actually come from Brian Russell, who says the criticism is that Aikido only works against untrained, drunk, etc. attackers, not against anyone with skill. And boy, I've heard this one quite a bit. And the excuse is that Aikido isn't meant for fighting trained people in a ring or a cage. Who wants to field that one first? Anybody? All right, well, I'll jump in with it. There are different realms of violence. In the realm of a real world encounter that perhaps started with a verbal exchange, like an argument, is a different level of engagement than two fighters that knew for weeks they were about to get into a fight with each other and are put into a competition ring or a cage. They know exactly when it's time for that referee to raise his hand that it's going to be full on physical go time. Now, in a mugging or some kind of a street altercation or an argument or where fights tend to happen for us civilized people, or we civilians, it doesn't work that same way. There are considerations for leading in to how does the fight actually start. It might be somebody who is drunk. Maybe that's why they are angry. Maybe they are on drugs, and they will attack a little differently than George St. Pierre would. or, Anderson Silva. So yes, you want to train for what your student is likely going to encounter, and they aren't going to encounter a ring fight. They might encounter a real actual person. And I think that that's an important training factor to consider. But the second one is that if you assume that whatever you execute, whatever technique that you try will not be countered, that's a major problem, because even somebody who is drunk or untrained may counter or resist what it is you try to do to them, or the technique that you try to do, which gets us back to our previous discussion about a creative uke, or one that tries to counter or resist or somehow foil whatever it is you're trying to do. I think that the excuse that Aikido is designed merely to face people with no ability, how much martial art training do you really need to deal with somebody who's blind drunk? Like, do you need 8 to 10, 15, 20 years worth of martial art training to deal with that guy? No. So I don't think that is really a valid excuse for, assuming that you will always take your opponent by surprise, you'll always get them helpless, and you'll always be able to succeed with whatever technique you're going to do. They could be slippery, wily. They could even just fall and wind up foiling your technique. So this is where the adaptability of technique, I think, is important. And it's also important to put in perspective where you are going to be expressing your art. It's a lot different in a ring. And there was a great video where they took some MMA fighters out to the Marine Corps training camp and said, here's how the Marines train. And they put them through kind of their paces. And they sort of did, here's the Marines in the ring with these MMA fighters. And the Marines didn't do terribly well. Then they took the MMA fighters out onto a Marine course and ran them through facing the Marines, and the MMA fighters didn't do very well. So not to say either one of them are superior, but they are meant to be effective within their realms. And civilian violence is its own realm. So in fact, I would say it's one of the harder realms to deal with, because there are so many different ways it can happen and so many different surprises that can be thrown your way. And those two apply to the Marines and to the military. But what the military often has is support. You have a team that you are on. And oftentimes with civilian violence, you're on your own. And it can happen anytime, anywhere. A soldier generally knows when he's on a battlefield and that when he needs to be, quote unquote, on. Whereas in a civilian environment, you could be at the grocery store or going to your car or anywhere, and late at night, you're tired, you're after your shift, and bang, now you're in a fight. So I guess those are some different comments about the subject of the untrained as your opponent. Any ideas?
Well, one thing I'll mention is, I don't know if anybody's actually fought a drunk, but their pain compliance is a lot different than someone that might be sober.
Absolutely. Same thing with angry.
Yes. And having dealt with drunks, it's hard to control sometimes. It's not easy. So to say that Aikido can be used against drunk people versus other people, I don't think that's accurate. I think there's so many variables when dealing with anyone, that, especially someone that might be drunk, it's not so easy.
Sure. Dan, anything?
Yeah, I think martial arts now tend to be judged on the basis of whether it will work in a ring or a cage. And I think that's the majority. And yeah, cool. And there's a reason for that, because everything's tried and tested in the ring and the cage, but it's tried and tested in one specific arena, as you alluded to, where it's like, okay.
And we do have that criticism coming up soon, that the MMA one. So we'll get to that as well.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, but as you said, it's it's in an environment where you're going to fight. And self-defense, the whole idea of it is you're defending yourself. You're not prepared. You haven't just done an 8-week fight training camp. You're not in the best shape of your life. Maybe you've had a few beers and a kebab and you're not feeling the best and you're on your way home. And this is where it's more important at that point to go into like the awareness stuff, that not even the physical skills of self-defense, like the awareness, being in groups, things like that. And that's the more important aspect of self-defense than, oh, can I apply a wrist lock if someone grabs me? Can I do that? It's like, no, it's largely irrelevant. It's like, can you get home safe? The best self-defense is when absolutely nothing happens and you just walk through your front door after a good night out. It's like, cool, then I did my job at that point. So I don't know. Aikido only works for drunk people and things like that. arguably it doesn't really work for drunk people either. It doesn't, I don't know. I don't think anything works if you don't test it. And again, it goes back to that compliance thing. Like, so I'd argue that it wouldn't even work against drunk people for the majority of people. So, that's maybe therein where the issue lies.
Yeah, that's a good point. Brian Russell had another one. He said, criticism is that Aikido knife defenses suck and no one is going to attack you with a sword. Who wants to go on first?
Oh, knife defense. Right. I don't know. Knife defense is always a tricky one, no matter what, because the knife defense that every single martial arts does, unless you may be looking at something like Kali or something like that, which is maybe slightly more accurate, but I think the majority is artificial and it's not real. And there was a great video of Guru Danasanto doing a thing with the police officers where it was like them versus a gun, or they had their gun and they had to draw the weapon before Dan got to them and stabbed them. And every single time Dan just rushed in and was like, and just, because it just takes so long to kind of draw and prepare for anything. And with knife defenses, there's always one stab, which I just do not, it's like, and then again, it's the retraction thing. They leave the arm out so you can apply the wrist lock, you can do whatever you want. No, stabbing from what and luckily I've never been in that situation, but from what I've seen or read about and things like that, it's like a pepper emotion. So retract and withdraw, whether it's like ice pick grip or whether it's like a standard grip, they just want to put holes in. So there's just no time. And that's, if you see the knife, great. But then there's also the issue of a lot of the time you won't see the knife. And with your adrenaline firing off and things like that, you probably won't even feel the blade until it's too late at that point. It's like, oh, well, there's just nothing you can do. But I also don't think that Aikido says that it's a good knife defense system. And if it does, then shut up and don't say that. But I don't think it purports to be. Again, I think it's part of the tradition thing of like the tanto, the wakizashi, the katana. I think it's another traditional aspect of training, the same as you do with the stick, with the jo and the bokken and things like that. I think it's more of the traditional side than this will work in a street fight. And so I think, again, it's important to differentiate between the two.
Sure. All right, Brandon, you're up.
I agree. I think there is no legitimate knife defense in Aikido. But then we say knife defense, what does that really mean? Because if you're going to get stabbed, my experience has shown that if somebody has a knife and they're really going to stab you and the situation allows it, you're going to get stabbed at some point. You may not die, but you're going to get cut, even if you are defending. I think it was Josh Gold that was doing some real good research on knife.
Yeah, he got together with Jeff Imada, who's a knife practitioner, and they kind of tore down the illusion about Aikido's knife defenses.
Yeah, well, there's none, in my opinion. I don't see any. Again, it's traditional movements, but there's no practicality to it.
Right.
And if you fight somebody that's a Filipino knife fighter who trains in that kind of stuff,
Done.
I mean, you're done. There's no, it doesn't matter what you know. I mean, you're done.
Right.
Knives are really dangerous weapons, and I don't care what martial art you do. I think if somebody presents a knife and you can't run away or you can't stop that threat via firearm or something, you're going to get hurt. That's just my personal opinion. That's what I've seen and experienced. So
it's like you get in a water fight, expect to get wet. Getting a knife fight, get cut. Get in a water fight, expect to get wet. Getting a knife fight, get cut, isn't it? It's the same thing. It's and as I said, luckily I've never experienced it, but I know people that have. And there's just no stopping it. And people say run away, and it's like, okay. And I know someone in London that was based out of knife crime London, not good, but he's trained a lot and done a lot of door staff and had a lot of experiences with knives. And he tested it with his students where he said, okay, run. And 9 times out of 10 they caught him. And at that point it was done, stabbed, thank you. And at that point you're out of breath and you're done anyway, so you can't fight back. So there is no knife defense, I don't think.
Yeah, I think the criticism that Aikido knife defenses suck is absolutely, it's unarguable. Like
no argument with that.
And here's the thing, like from a teaching standpoint, is it better to teach garbage than to teach nothing at all? I think it's better to teach nothing at all than to teach garbage.
But again,
that's not to say
how you
that there
frame
are
it
not.
again, though.
What's that?
It's how you frame it again, though. If you kind of go, this is looking at the traditional aspect of our martial art. This is where we came from. We came from the samurai, blah, 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 blah. We're going to look at some, this is the historical reason because they had armor here. So these are the weak points. Cool, teach it as that. But then don't also say, right, this is really good self-defense now.
Well, even by framing, you could say, Well, what I'm about to show you, these are the quote unquote traditional, I'll get back to that word, knife stuff that the defenses that Aikido teaches. Even if you say it's garbage and then you spend an hour teaching your students, didn't you just waste that hour? I mean, if you admit that, and but the other thing, and you guys have it right, that yes, you do want to get the hell away from that knife and run away if you can, but running away is precarious. And my last episode was on the knife and on that deadly level fights and violence, lethal level. And just kind of to sum up though, there are ways that you have to learn if you're going to try to survive those things. There are fundamentals of it, but Aikido doesn't have any of them. They really don't. And I think that they need, if you're going to take it on, that's something that needs to be absorbed from arts and practitioners and instructors that have material that is pretty good. And I won't say great. And I heard this put by Ryan Hoover over at what's his site? I can't remember the name of it, but he's an instructor, and he says, I don't like knife defenses. I don't like my own knife defenses that I teach. I just like them better than everything else that I've seen. And that's a good, sobering perspective of the fact that when you face a knife, it is very, very dangerous. I mean, and there's a good chance you will not succeed or survive. But by training, you can improve your odds as best you can. And that's about all you can hope for. But, teaching fundamental, quote unquote fundamentals, if they're bad, are they fundamentals? If it's a fundamental, it should be good. It should serve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this is the knife will point it out. And the last one I want to address is no one's going to attack you with a sword. Very rarely, but given the level of lunacy these days, and I've been seeing, articles from time to time going back 10, 15 years of some nut job that grabs a katana and is running down the street, or, it can happen, but of course the odds of it are so remotely against you. I'd say the same thing about Aikido's stuff with the sword, especially when it comes to disarms. Absolute garbage. Yeah. If someone with zero skill and intent has got a sword and they get near you, you're pretty much going to be toast. And that's whether you try to do Aikido's sword disarms or what have you, or you just about whatever you try. A sword is an incredibly dangerous tool that makes a knife look like a walk in the park. And just somebody waving it around carelessly, in fact, would probably be more dangerous, because with a predictable, nice cut that you can see coming, you have an idea where that thing is coming and going to. But just waving it around, especially something really sharp, it's like trying to stick your hand or your arm into a Cuisinart. It's just going to get lopped off. Yeah. And so I'm highly critical of the knife work, and I think that the sword stuff is a complete joke. And in fact, you're creating more danger to your students by showing them that than you are just ignoring it entirely. All right, so let's jump to the, oh, I'm sorry, that was just the criticism. I even forgot to mention the excuse. Well, we just jumped all over that one. But it says the excuse is that the weapons are there to train our footwork, blending, empty hand techniques. Besides, did you hear about that one guy in the Philippines, Malawi, Brazilian favela, who was attacked with a machete? Same kind of a thing. There are machete sword attacks that happen once in a blue moon, but the idea that training knives and with swords is to train your footwork and to train your empty hand stuff. There's a tiny little bit of truth, I think, in training weapons to improve your movement, but by and large, it's more, I think, for entertainment and for doing samurai cosplay and samurai LARPing than it is for actual practical training methods. Yeah, that's kind of my view of it.
Agree.
Yeah, if you're looking at weapons and stuff like that, I'd say if you want to delve into that, go to the Filipino martial arts. Look at the stuff like the Kali, the Eskrima, because I think that's all valid stuff. And again, that's been tried and tested through people actually having machete knife fights and things like that, and having stick fights. And it's like, yeah, shit, I don't want to do that, but you can learn the lineage of where it's come from. Sure. But in terms of Aikido, it's like, nah, like there's nothing there of substantive value in
Sure.
terms of.
This one came from Dan. I guess you had this one come in afterwards, but the criticism is that conditioning is a huge factor in all martial arts, body conditioning, mental conditioning, and building the body up. Aikido says that there's a strong emphasis on building the body, but it is only structurally. To throw a leg kick at most Aikidokan, they're going to definitely feel it and be out of commission. Most real life altercations last seconds, but you're knackered because of adrenaline. Aikido practitioners aren't athletes and generally have a low fitness level compared to other martial artists. The excuse is that Aikido doesn't use athletics, so strength isn't needed for technique to work. Aikido is so efficient that it doesn't rely on athletics.
Bullshit.
Let me take the brunt on this one, because I tell you how many morbidly obese Aikido practitioners and instructors are out there.
Yeah.
I'm just going to call the elephant in the room for what it is.
Yeah.
Zero level of athletic ability. And I will grant a lot of latitude for people that have trained for so many years that their knees are bad, or that they're older. I have a great deal of respect for that. But on the other hand, I can also look at somebody's body and say, boy, you've let this thing slide. Like, there's no excuse for being in such bad physical condition that you can really not walk across the floor without huffing and puffing and gasping for breath. Like,
Right.
unless there's a medical condition, obviously that's something to do with it. But the fact that I think that the excuse is, well, we're so efficient that no muscle is needed, or no strength is needed, is any real martial artist would just go, get out of here with that. Just be quiet.
Yeah.
I have to call it for what it is,
No,
you guys'
absolutely
thoughts?
right. I agree. I mean, there are some, I used to be very out of shape. So I can understand where a lot of people are coming from, but you have to have some sort of physicality in doing any kind of physical technique. And Aikido is not excluded from that. So I don't buy that at all, personally. You nailed it. You were exactly correct in your assessment of everything. So yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Sure. How about you, Dan?
Yeah, a martial art that doesn't need athleticism. It's like, it just doesn't gel with me. It doesn't. No, it's not a thing. Like, martial arts should be a physical thing. They should be, and that maybe there's a reason why there's the Aikido.
All right. Sorry about that little break. We can have Dan go on his point. Go ahead.
Yeah, martial arts and physicality, I think, go hand in hand. And maybe this is a question that needs asking, why Aikido practitioners are generally seen as of a certain age and perhaps of a certain weight as well. You don't see many high-level Aikido guys that are in their 20s, 30s and are, fit and athletic. And maybe that's a question that needs asking as to reason why, and a bit of a mindset shift needed. I think the argument that, we don't need to use strength and power, bullshit. You get a 20, 30-year-old, they're going to use strength and power, sorry. But I think as you get older and you get more proficient and you get more technical, that should become more technical, but an element of fitness is going to be needed regardless. And yeah, there should be an element of physical conditioning. Like, just if you're a martial artist and if you claim to be a martial artist or a martial arts practitioner, you should have, it doesn't have to be an elite level of fitness. It has to be a functional level of fitness, especially if what you claim to be teaching is self-defense, where it's over in seconds, as is said, but within those few seconds, it's 100% blitz, high intensity, and at the end of it, you're blowing hard against a fully resistant opponent. If you're not used to that, that's going to be a big, big, big shock.
I think one of the byproducts or the results of the attitude of teaching or marketing Aikido as being, well, you don't need strength or you don't need athleticism, is you create an expectation in the student's mind of, oh, I can be weak or feeble or overweight or, in very poor cardio conditioning. And this should be the art for me. Well, if you look at it, what we've collected because of marketing it that way, you can see how this is sort of the chicken and the egg cycle. You do one to attract the other, and then it builds that side. And I think that it would be far better to keep with the efficiency. And I do like judo's, what do they say? The minimum effort for maximum result. kind of approach. I admire that efficiency. And I think judo is very similar to Aikido in that that's the ultimate goal. You want that efficiency. But I also admire judo for the fact that you don't really see judoka who are physical cream puffs. They all have a certain level of strength and physicality and fitness for the most part. I mean, they're older ones that are, you know, a little banged up, but there is that's kind of the ante on the table to play the game. That there's a certain level of physical requirement, and they don't make an illusion about that. Yes, you look at Akusa Mifune, who's just, I mean, that to me, he is poetry in motion. At what was he, 70 some years old when some of those films were made? He clearly does not use tremendous athleticism, but you could also see that he was strong, like he was capable, he was athletic even at his age. And there's a danger of taking on too much of the nonchalant approach to, oh, I can just wave my hand or I can sort of swoosh around. And I've seen tons of this in video where that attitude is taken to such an absurd degree where compliant ukes are flung around as though somebody is strolling through a park picking flowers. It's like, and that when this criticism comes in, they say, well, look at that. That doesn't look at all like it would be realistic or practical. And the truth is it's not. We have to own that part. And I love the way you put that. Any martial art is about a certain amount of athleticism. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're using pure strength. You know, there are arts that use a great deal of strength, but you are using efficiency. You are trying to use leverage, getting the most from what you have. But there's never a point when being a bit stronger than you are, or being a bit more fit than you are, or being in better athletic shape is a detriment. It is always only a benefit. And yeah, so I agree with you. You don't need to be an Adonis or some kind of a physical specimen, although it certainly helps. But you also need to maybe back off the donuts a bit, and to get some conditioning going, because it's crucial. It's
setting the example as well. If you're an instructor, you need to set the example, and you need to be like leading from the front. And I think this is something I really believe in as an instructor. You need to, if you're purporting to, you know, teach fitness and self-defense, and that's how you market your classes, is all right, it's a way to get fit. But then you come onto the mat in an ill-fitting dogi with your belly hanging out a little bit, and you know, you're just used to doing a couple of demonstrations and then walking around the class kind of going, oh, well, you know, change this, change that, change this. You're not leading from the front at that point, and that's where the bullshit comes in. And it's like, no, you should be leading from the front. If you're the instructor, you need to keep fitter than your students, I'd say, or at least as fit. So if your students are outgassing you, it's like, well, you need to reevaluate what you're doing, I think, because, you know, it's the same as anything. You need to set the example. And if you're fit and if you're unfit and fat and overweight and, you know, have got no physical conditioning because you rely on the strength of your Aikido technique and you're so advanced, what example is that setting to white belts who then come into your class thinking, all right, well, I want to get a bit fitter, I want to lose a little bit of weight, but oh, hang on, well, you're fat and overweight, and you know you have got no element of conditioning yourself. Why would I go to you?
I think one of the worst things a teacher can do or an instructor can do is pass on their own weaknesses to their students who are not constrained by the same limitations. You know, an example might be techniques that require healthy knees, and the instructor's knees are shot. And now he doesn't even teach their students how to do stuff that requires you to squat or to drop to a knee or something of that nature. So, and I've used very much the same way, because if you are overweight and out of shape, you're going to limit what you do technique wise. These are strategic choices that you will have to make. But, you know, a younger athletic fit person shouldn't be limited in the same way.
Injuries have to be taken account of, obviously, and I'm not saying that to be an instructor, be in peak physical fitness and things, because most people, let's be honest, who have done martial arts for any amount of time have got niggling injuries, whether it's just, you know, whether it's more serious injuries that are kind of like, well, I can't do this, to maybe going something like, well, I need to be careful of this. Like through Aikido, I've got bad knees now, or I've got a bad knee and it's been operated on a few times, so I need to be careful about what I do in terms of twisting motions and things like that. But it doesn't stop me doing other things, and I don't just kind of go, oh, well, that's me done for my physical element then. It's like, no, you kind of work around stuff, and, you know, you keep fit in other ways. You set the example.
All right, let's move to the next one. And this comes from Sam Gray. His criticism is Aikido is not an effective martial art. That's why you don't see it in MMA. Here's the big daddy right here. And the excuse is, I almost got a spit take on that one, didn't I? Nice. The excuse is Aikido is too devastating to be used in a sport. Boy, these are two good laugh points right here. Who wants to front this one up?
Go on, Brandon.
What was the excuse? It's too lethal?
Aikido is too devastating to be used in a sport.
Devastating. What is so devastating? I'm that a little bit. Man, I just don't think, I think there's a rule set in the cage. That's why you don't see it there. I mean, it has nothing, you can't use wrist locks or finger locks or anything like that. So why would you have something that you can't use in the cage?
Sure.
I guess there's other elements of Aikido that you could use, but would it be attributed to Aikido, or would somebody say, oh, well, that was, a clothesline. It wasn't, Iminage,
right,
or something like that, as an example. But being too lethal, get the hell out of here with that. I mean, come on, too lethal. There's just a rule set. There's a rule set in the cage.
And I want to cover the criticism first, and that is that firstly, you do see it in the MMA ring.
Mm-hmm.
You might not see an Aikidoka or an Aikido practitioner in the ring. And I know there's a guy, Jason DeLuca or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He's an MMA fighter with an Aikido background, but
yep.
I'm talking about just other fighters that use techniques that are widely known as being Aikido techniques. Mm-hmm. They are in the ring. There are people that have done compilation videos of actual MMA fights and have taken a clip and then shown, here's what it looks like from, two people training it or doing a demonstration of it. And yes, it looks different. Obviously the fighters are clothed differently, but that's what it looks like in full motion. And you nailed it just right. Like, what is an Iriminage? What is a Sayunage? These things do come out in MMA fights. They just don't, they're the far more direct and simple execution of them. And they look chaotic because a fight is chaos. It really is. It's not been sterilized to make a really pretty demonstration. It's not been toned down to be a good teaching type of demo or something like that. But there are many different Aikido throws and techniques that have been used, in competition, not only judo, but in MMA. So the fact that somebody didn't see it, it's because they weren't looking, or they wanted to kind of create a false argument. But as for the excuse that Aikido is too devastating to be used in a sport, I completely agree. These guys, athletes are used to getting thrown around and slammed on the ground. The worst that we really can do in Aikido is to slam somebody on the ground, because the ground hits harder than anything.
Yeah.
And if these guys are used to it because they're heavy duty athletes, being thrown, not a big deal. Yeah, it'll bang them up a little bit, but it's not going to end a fight. So I don't really think there's anything that's too devastating to be used in a sport, although they do have some rules against some certain things, finger grabbing being one of them. But other stuff that's not allowed in MMA is something that Aikido would never use, like 12 to 6 strikes to the head and things like that, kicking to the back of the head when somebody's on the ground or things like that. But I just, fighting is fighting, and the things that happen in a ring are kind of natural. And I think that's, if you look at where Aikido got its techniques, or Daito-ryu, it came from fighting. Like all this stuff was codified. These motions were not unique to Daito-ryu or unique to Aikido. They were just what fighting was, and they worked and people used them. And that's where we've gotten into this very ritualized subset of particular techniques. But too devastating to be used in a sport, total garbage, utter garbage excuse. I think the better answer is Aikido techniques are used in MMA. You don't see them because you're used to seeing Hakama and demonstration.
Right.
Dan, what would you have for this one?
Yeah, I agree. I think Aikido principles are used in the ring or the cage, maybe more than techniques, because I think the principles are then adapted The things like entering in, turning, using momentum, things like that. I think that's, that's pretty standard again across most martial arts of, bridging the gap, I suppose, or, entering no man's land, bridging the gap, doing that, taking the balance, throwing them, doing whatever. And yeah, you see that. But this is the argument that I've had again and again and again. It was the Aikido principles are good. The way that they're taught and they're set up for them is wrong because it's so artificial in that way. But I think the principles, and if you do Aikido for a good amount of time like I did, and then move into something else, I think the Aikido helps. And I think it helps you learn the techniques better, and it helps the changeover and the cross-training adapt better, which I think is a good thing. So yeah, I do think you see principles of Aikido in the ring, but you don't see it, as you said, like a perfectly executed Koshinagi or something like that, or some like it wouldn't happen, or an Iriminagi or something like that. But you see the principles of the using, the spin, the turn in, and the entering in and things like that.
Sure.
But MMA guys are some of the most conditioned athletes in the world. So to say that, your art is too deadly to use against, bullshit, absolute bullshit. Like just complete, like there's no argument for that really, other than to say, sorry.
And that's a statement that will ruin your own credibility. If you,
yeah, of course, I'll switch off at that point.
Somebody,
if you say that, I'm like,
it's just like, whatever, you're a moron.
Yeah.
So hopefully that will shed some light on it. We've had a number of them that came from Chris Gonzalez to move on, and these are some really good ones too. Criticism number one, which he lists, is Aikido only works against overcommitted attacks and falls apart when faced with realistic attacks. The excuse is, with roots in sword, Aikido was designed to deal with fully committed attacks based on weapon strikes, the one hit, one kill principle. If an attacker isn't giving you real energy, you might as well use another art like karate to deal with them. Most people that are disciplined enough to become proficient strikers are good people that probably wouldn't be an aggressor. And this kind of covers a few different points, but I think we've all run into and seen you have to really overcommit your attack if it's going to be a real attack, which means to overlean your body. And now in doing so, you tip yourself, and then the Aikido Nage can easily throw that person. And I think that is a very solid criticism. We cannot just train our ukes to completely give up their balance so that we can take advantage of them, because a good striker can strike without losing his balance and be very dangerous and hit powerfully. And
a mediocre striker,
sometimes you have to take their posture away from them, not just wait for them to give it up on their own. Thoughts?
Go ahead, Dan.
I'd argue that, again, you've got to think now, not most, but a high percentage of people have done some training in something nowadays. And if you're looking at a practical, even if it's just like, I don't know, like a boxing fit class or something like that, maybe not even to take competitively into the ring or to learn as a proper martial art, they've just done something to keep fit. So most people kind of know now roughly how to throw a strike and know how not to overcommit themselves, unless, again, you kind of put the element of alcohol and things like that, which obviously then increases your chances of overbalancing and things. But yeah, I'd argue that, again, the way that we attack is unrealistic, because we do kind of go and lunge in a very Buzz Lightyear-esque fashion, where it's like you press the button and they chop. Mm-hmm. It's like it's not a real thing. And the way that you spin round and they'll just follow you round, and like in the Irimi Nagi kind of thing, they'll just follow you around, but they're not going to turn into you or anything like that. They're not going to go into a grapple or into a clinch or anything. They'll just kind of be led round in a circle with no resistance, no nothing. They'll just follow it through your movement. It's just it's not a thing. And again, it's that over reliance on uki being a good uki. And this is why sometimes, not always, but sometimes you see high level instructors that only use kind of one or two ukis through their demonstrations, because they're the tried and tested ones. They know there's like a relationship formed between the two of them, where it's like, I know what you're going to do and this is going to be your response. So they just use them time and time again, because they've developed that relationship. And it becomes, as you said, like a choreographed dance, the same as stuntmen, or stunt fight coordinators, etc., use the guys that they know and trust because they've worked with them before. The same thing applies here. I've worked with this uki. I know they can fall. I know that they'll move in the way that I want them to move. So therefore I'll use them. But it's more impressive if you bring up someone that's no idea and kind of go, okay, well, now you can kind of attack me and we'll see what happens. That's the more impressive demo. Sure. But less pretty.
All right. Brandon, do you have anything to finish off with this one?
Again, no, I feel like it's covered. I would
covered.
keep spouting hot air.
Yeah, and getting down to some of these other ones, they seem to be largely repeats of what the topics we've covered earlier. So I wanted to cover one more topic, and this is kind of a wrap up in that the idea that if we were to take on dealing with these things and addressing these criticisms and adjusting training to deal with more realistic attacks, stuff that is outside of what is commonly held as the modern Aikido curriculum, and taking on techniques from other arts and other sources, if we were to do that to bolster Aikido, is it worth keeping the word Aikido as what we're doing, or is it worth taking on another name? And I guess the best analogy I can think of is when Bruce Lee did what he did, he came up with his own name. He didn't use Kung Fu or Wing Chun. He came up with Jeet Kune Do, and to describe and to paint the picture of a new art that he kind of scientifically assembled to be more complete. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Personally, I think that Aikido is not worth abandoning and saying, all right, this is so hyper specialized that it's now useless and it needs to be kind of left as a museum to what it was 50 years ago, and a new art needs to be built with a new name. I personally have enough respect for what Aikido perhaps was, because I wasn't alive at the time when O-sensei was, but I have a great deal of respect for what he put together, and the fact that he wanted Aikido to keep growing and to keep building, not to become frozen in time, much less to degrade, which I think that it has. And so my own heart tells me that Aikido would still remain to be a good name, because you still have the soul and the spirit of the art that at least that it was, as opposed to saying, let's come up with some brand new name and rebrand it. Thoughts on that?
I think it's a big one,
It is.
because I think, firstly, I think the name Aikido now has so many negative connotations to it. It's going to be hard to backtrack that, even if you start putting stuff out, because people are still putting stuff out that's more of the effective side of it, or more of the street side of it, or more of the applicability side of it. But it's still not nearly enough to kind of.
It's a big mountain to climb. That's for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a huge mountain to climb, and I think it's got such a name and a reputation now that it's difficult to backtrack from that. I also think that it's difficult to backtrack that if you change Aikido, or if you make it, or if you adapt it and things like that. I think there'll be a lot of high-ranking instructors that would then kick off about that, because they've reached a certain level now of being comfortable. And then if they've then got to teach Aikido as something that, or they wouldn't, they just wouldn't. They'd keep doing what they do, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to have the humility to kind of go, oh, actually, I'm a 6th Dan, 7th Dan, 8th Dan, but I still don't have that confidence maybe that you alluded to earlier to handle some drunk guy in the street. Can I change my Aikido now? Can I adapt it? Or am I quite comfortable just teaching my class and doing that? I'm making all right income. I've got a decent business. I've got hierarchy in the Aikido world. I'm an 8th Dan, blah, 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 blah. Do they have that humility and that lack of ego to then kind of go, oh, I need to go back to the source perhaps? So I think that would be another point of interesting discussion perhaps, but yeah,
I think you nailed it on that one.
I think that I think we're in such a time capsule with what the curriculum of Aikido is, that like Dan said, you're going to have pushback obviously from old school, high ranking, people that have taught it for 40 years, and the stigma of Aikido with people that are younger, that are looking for something to do. They're drawn to MMA, judo, jiu-jitsu, or something along those lines, and they just kind of see Aikido as this fluffy nuance that's there but not really there. And so this is a very tough and hard thing to answer or to even contemplate, because I know what my Aikido is to me, but how do I really convey that to other people? And that's the problem. You know, we can add lots of different things to Aikido and make it more applicable and better able to meet today's needs. Because you're right, O-sensei did say, you know, Aikido is ever changing and it should continue to ever change. And for some reason, I don't know where that change stopped. It was almost apparently right after he passed, and his own son stopped things and set out their curriculum, and that's just the way it's been since. And there's been no opportunity for growth, at least not mainstream. I know
Sure.
that there are
In
people.
fact, a lot of the curriculum has been shrinking. I mean, I've been hearing of techniques that have been removed from it. And where does that go? You know, that's a good question.
And Dan, you studied Yoshinkan, I believe you said.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, more direct to Daito-ryu than what I would say modern Aikido is.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a more tradition, but it's also more applicable than later on things. So I know that there's techniques from Daito-ryu that never made it to today, but they may be prevalent or present in Yoshinkan. I don't know, because I've never studied Yoshinkan, but
I agree. I think the Oshinkan's more akin to the old Daito-ryu stuff. Like, I studied some of the traditional Aikikai as well, just for a little while, but it was chalk and cheese. Really, it was completely different in terms of its perspective and outlook. And you know, the Kion Dosa and things like that was originally taught for the police and things like that, because they needed the 6 basic movements to do in large groups. And from that, obviously, then came the jiyu-waza and things like that. But there's a lot of things in there that are very jujitsu-esque, and it's a lot less of the circular motion. Like, there's still elements of that, but it seems for me it was more direct. So it was more like straight to the point and focus more on the body strength and alignment of the body, rather than kind of, you know, bending the back over and things like that. It was everything in line with the heel. So it's like head to heel, good strength up there, like that straight posture and that body line. So a heavy emphasis on posture rather than esoteric concepts.
And I think a factor here too is, and this is a tremendous irony in my opinion, and that is, you have organizations or instructors that say what I do is Aikido and what you do is not Aikido.
Right.
Where in the competitive, wouldn't that be the competitive mindset of competing over what is Aikido, what isn't, and then arguing basically over the ownership, whether it's the ownership of the name or what exactly it is. Fighting is influenced by other things that it comes across, and I don't think Aikido is any different. Any martial art will take on flavors of the practitioners who have backgrounds in other things, or find efficiencies with other methods that they come across. That's a natural thing, not a bad thing. I think that enhances an art. It doesn't poison it or water it down. It makes it more potent. And I understand that the Japanese have a very heavy tradition towards respect for elders, so much so that they idolize them, and anything that someone did that was respectable is viewed like it must never be changed. It must be, you know, isolated and preserved. And I guess I can respect preservation and that level of respect, but to have something as dynamic as martial arts and fighting, to have it try to be frozen in time, really does it a disservice more than it does it than it shows respect for what was done there. It would be, I guess, like all of us driving around Model A's cars because we have such respect for Henry Ford and his innovations. Like, well, you know, it just doesn't. I don't think it holds true. And
things evolve.
And I think, I think those people who want to innovate the art, if they wind up being driven out of the Aikido community, those are the ones that that the survival of Aikido as a martial art will rest on their shoulders. If they are driven out and create a new name, what will happen to that art? And I'll go back to, you know, Bruce Lee's, if you want to find a Jeet Kune Do instructor, you can. If you want to find a traditional Wing Chun instructor, they are very hard to find nowadays. Because, and most of them will say, I'll teach you Wing Chun, but I'm a Jeet Kune Do instructor. I'll teach you the subset, but here's what I really do. And I see Aikido instructors drifting that same direction. And Dan, you're a perfect example of that. You're using an Aikido flavored art that has other things to it. And I think I'm doing kind of the same thing as well. I still like the name and what Aikido stands for. And although we could get into endless arguments about what exactly that is, but I do think it's worth not abandoning. At least that's my mindset right now. And that might change as time goes on. And
I haven't trained in Aikido for years now, like traditionally in a gi or anything like that, or with other Aikidoka. But I would say that Aikido was my first proper martial art, and it's kept with me. So everything that I do now has got principles involved with Aikido. So there's always a flavor now of being, of what I do is somewhat Aikido. It's just taking a different turn, as you said. And, I'll still, and I think keeping that tradition is important still. And, attributing that you do have a history in it, and, being thankful to your instructors and things like that, and acknowledging them and giving them the recognition rather than just saying, oh, I came up with this myself. Like, as you said, it always said that, he had influences from Wing Chun, he had influences from other arts that he studied, but he always gave recognition to them as well. But he also said, well, now this is an amalgamation of everything I've learned, and let's call it JKD. It's the same. Anyone can do that. It's not disrespectful, because you're still paying homage to the art and still saying, well, this is my flavor. This is my take on it. You learn to be a chef, but then you put your own twist on a meal, don't you? It'd be a really boring world if everyone was just exactly the same and everyone did exactly the same martial art.
Imagine what music or the art world would be if everybody just did exactly what they were taught.
Yeah, if everyone just learned classical music and didn't deviate from that and go into blues or jazz or anything like that and didn't do something different, it'd be a very, very different world, and a very boring world, I think. People are inherently different. So I think it's important. And martial arts is such a great way of showing your expression of that art and showing your uniqueness. I think that, it's important. But again, keep that respect and keep that tradition alive. But also tradition moves on.
It does. It should continue to advance, because any living thing is either growing or it's dying.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think Aikido's dying.
I would have to agree. And
it's up to those. Life support.
Yeah, it definitely is. And people have asked me, like, what do you think the future of Aikido is? And I'll say, I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say the future of Aikido will rest on the people that are actively trying to build it and try to grow it, not the ones who are trying to limit it or trying to reduce it. And I guess that leads me into kind of wrapping up. And that is, this video is going to be posted on the Aikibudo Alliance Facebook group. This is a brand new group we just established with the spirit of trying to grow Aikido. And we chose in this way, we chose the name Aikibudo because it goes back, it was the term used before Aikido was used as an umbrella that brought many different arts kind of together, or described many different arts. And it was also at a time where effectiveness was at the heart of the development of the art. And so for those who are interested, this is not just for Aikido people, but for any martial artist that wants to expand their journey and to work together and learn from one another. So everybody's welcome. We'd like to have people in. Like I said, we just got things started. It's March in 2021 right now, and this video will be up for a while. So if you want to come and join us, there's no fee or anything like that. It's just come on in and discuss and have discussions like this and learn from them. I think there's tremendous potential, upward potential of Aikido to be a robust art that can stand proudly with all the other arts that are out there that are potent and capable. I like the term, the excuse, we're addressing the excuses that we did today, because we shouldn't have to make excuses for our art. When there's a criticism, we should look at ourselves and say, is this accurate? If it's accurate, let's fix it. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get to work, so we don't have to have excuses. Anything you guys want to wrap up with? Share your projects or any last thoughts?
I'm just glad that you did this. I think it's needed, and I know that this discussion and moving forward with adding things, or keeping Aikido the name and then putting other things in it, that's gonna twist the traditionalists up a little bit. And we referenced Bruce Lee, and I think it's going to be like that, where he got a lot of pushback from a lot of different masters.
Yeah, he did.
a lot of things he did. And when you start ruffling those feathers and really pushing what we're talking about pushing, and it gets the exposure that I think it probably is going to get, there's going to be some heavy hit back from those old school people.
Yeah.
And maybe even some of the students of those old school people. So, and I don't care. I think it's neat. I think they need
bring
to
on the storm.
Yeah, I think it's a realistic thing, and I have a lot of criticisms myself of Aikido and its shortcomings, and they're there. We can't deny it. We have to accept it. But that's my take on it. I just really appreciate being able to be here and talk with you guys and express what we have done so far.
Well, it was great, Brandon. How about you, Dan? Do you want to have any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's awesome what's happening. I think it's needed as well. I think that you're right. We're probably going to ruffle some feathers, but I think they're feathers that maybe need ruffling as well. And where there's people, there's politics, and that's
Absolutely.
just always the way. It's always going to happen. People have egos. Everyone's got an ego. We all have egos. Like it's a thing. But whatever. I think it's just being open and honest with people and not being disrespectful, but also questioning and not just falling into that realm of just saying yes, us. Become a little us machine. It's like, right, think for yourself a little bit and start being an us robot and maybe question things and go and look elsewhere and train in different things. Like a big thing I want to say is just cross train as well. I think I think it's so important for any martial artist to get a flavor of something else. And just cross train and train with different people, train with as many people as you can. Don't limit yourselves. Learn from everyone, don't just limit, because what's the point? Limitations on life aren't good. We've all been limited this year through a pandemic and we all hate it. So why would you limit in your martial arts journey as well?
Very well said.
Yeah.
In fact, as you guys were talking, one last thought came to mind, and that is I would love to see so many of those great martial artists that left Aikido out of frustration to think about coming back into the realm. And to know that their ambition and their desire for training actual Budo, actual martial arts is coming back and is here again. And I know both of you have love Aikido, but have drifted away just out of being frustrated with it. And that's what we're trying to address. I've met a number of instructors that are in the same boat. Like I liked Aikido. I liked what it represented, but it just wasn't enough. It was too ritualistic. And so those people are the people we need in the realms, in the community. And I think they'd love to see what we were trying to do here. So if you're listening and you're one of those people, welcome back. We'd love to have you contributing again and bring what you went on to, whether it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've met people that have gone on to Sistema, into boxing, Sambo, other realms, because they were searching for a more physical approach that was comprehensive, and we can use all that. We can learn from all those things. So excellent. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much, guys. This was a great discussion. I can't wait to see what we get for feedback on it. So
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.